Hello, and welcome to another 9-minute Bible study. Our starting point, 2 Chronicles chapter 30, verse 8. Where have we been? In the Old Testament. King Hezekiah, he sent letters to everyone in Ephraim and Manasseh, in the 10 northern tribes, in the nation of Judah, to return to Jerusalem to celebrate the Passover. As part of the message, King Hezekiah sent the following. 1. That the people needed to return to the worship of the Lord. 2. That they needed to return to the morality of the Lord. 3. That they needed to stop being stubborn about God, that God is real. And number 4, that they needed to yield their lives to the Lord their God. Now, what does this mean to us? Our King Jesus is inviting those who, 1, have followed distorted truth and false doctrine. 2, those who left the church for the ways of the world. 3, those who have rejected God as God. Our King Jesus is bringing them back to the church. He is inviting them to be part of this end-time revival. We as a congregation, we are in agreement with our King that this should happen. The message, 1, return to the Lord our God. Leave behind what once was and come back to the Lord and worship Him. 2, to return to New Testament morality, a morality that the Apostle Paul discussed in detail in his letters. 3, don't be stubborn. In other words, believe that God is God and that Jesus is His Son. Next, yield yourself or surrender your life to Jesus. Now, the next part of this is in verse 8, which is enter into His sanctuary, which He has sanctified forever. For those in Hezekiah's time, this would be the temple. The call is to return to the temple to worship the Lord. In our time, the call is to return to church. The word is clear. Don't forsake the assembly of yourself together with believers. Staying at home, even just watching a film on the internet, is not enough. You need to be physically with those believers in your community so you can all work together for the great end-time revival. The only way your area is going to have a revival is if all the believers in your area gather together and work together to make it happen. We must be in the church for this to happen. And then, as a church, call those who had left to return. The next part, serve. What does this mean? Simply put, to serve means to live the rest of your life following the leading and the guiding of the Spirit. That's what it means for us as believers. The only way we can come back to the church, the only way we can live this life, the only way we can surrender to the Lord is simply by allowing the Spirit to lead every part of our life. When this happens, people will change. The community will change. The society will change. Everything will change. Now, at the end of verse 9, we see, for the Lord your God is gracious and merciful. The Lord is offering in this time His grace and His mercy. Let's look at the mercy first, and then we'll go back and look at grace. What is the mercy of the Lord? At the end of verse 6, it was what? He will return to you the remnant that was taken away into Assyria captivity. The bondage that the people were in, it would come to an end. In our time, we're looking at deliverance from what has controlled us, be it false doctrine, be it whatever addiction grabs a hold of us, be it whatever reason we had. That bondage from the enemy is going to be broken. The second part is at the end of verse 7 where it said, gave them up to desolation. In the days of Hezekiah, the society was in ruins. The economy was wrecked. By returning to the Lord, that would change. The desolation would come to an end. In our time, the mercy, the end of the society being wrecked, the end of the economy being wrecked. At the end of verse 8, it says what? The fierceness of his wrath may be turned away from you. The wrath of God that's hitting will be completely and totally stopped for us as a church. The first part is what? Deliverance. The second part is what? Restoration of what was. And the third part is the end of wrath. Now let's look at grace for a second. The good things that God's going to do. Mercy is really the end of the bad. Grace, the favor of God, the good. What happens after you are delivered? Liberty and freedom. What happens once the desolation is lifted? Restoration. That means not just the end of the bad, but we see society rebound in a godly way. We see the economy rebound in a godly way by turning to the worship of the Lord. The wrath, what is the opposite of wrath? Peace. The peace of God being restored. How does this happen? By returning to the worship of the Lord. Now, in verse 10, we see how the people in Israel and Judah reacted to all of this. Reaction number 1, Ephraim and Manasseh. They laughed them to scorn. In English, they thought the people who were talking about returning to the Lord were insane. The second group, the remnant of verse 11. This is a group of people, not the majority, but a good number, who heard the message, and they decided to humble themselves and come back to Jerusalem. The third group, Judah. The hand of God was on them to give them one heart to come back to the Lord. Our times. There is going to be a group who's going to reject no matter what. But we still need to preach to them. Why? There is a remnant who will come out of that group. They will return to the house of the Lord. They will leave the false doctrine, and they will leave the rejection that they had been following. For those who just went out in the world, there is going to be a return of the prodigals. The Lord is going to give one heart to bring them back to the church, forsaking the world and coming back to the true worship of the Lord. This is going to be a major part of the revival. The returning of the prodigals, the returning of those who left to the worship of the Lord. This is something we can look forward to. And we'll pick up with this in our next lesson.